My name is Matt Friedman. I've been reporting on New Jersey politics altogether for 7 years now. It's enough time to get to know the players. There's always, pretty much every day I learn something that I'm surprised about that I didn't know about before. So I just want to start with some basics about our political scene and how we wound up where we are right now with Governor Christie. We just need to start with the fact that the governor, by most accounts, whoever the New Jersey governor is automatically the most powerful governor in the country. He's the only real statewide elected official, if you don't count our two U.S. senators. He has the ability to nominate the Attorney General. Almost all the cabinet members serve at his pleasure. And not only that, but Chris Christie, by dint of his personality and extreme political skill, is the best governor, I think, in memory at wielding this power. So that has led us to the current source of controversy at the Port Authority. For the last 4 years, the governor has used the Port Authority, like governors past, as a place for patronage appointments and a place to use kind of off-the-books revenue for various state projects that don't have to show up in the state budget. This has been reported on in the past, but didn't really get noticed until we got into the Bridgegate scandal, which I'll go into a little bit later. But I just want to talk a little bit more about Chris Christie in general and the political situation in our state right now. One of the most interesting aspects about our governor is the way he's kept every Republican in the legislature with him. Anyone who opposes him is silent. And even in off-the-record conversations, it's extremely difficult to get a Republican legislator to register even the slightest bit of criticism of the governor. If you look at previous Republican governors, be it DeFrancesco, Whitman, even Kane, that really wasn't the case. And that's partly because, unlike before, the Republicans in the legislature are in the minority, so without Christie, there's not a whole lot they can get done. And there's also the interesting case that Christie, in fact, and we've seen that, Christie has made, I think you could argue, stronger alliances with certain Democratic leaders of the legislature than he has with the Republicans, despite the fact that they won't go against him. So how the governor got here is another thing. Now, even though we are a solidly Democratic state by demographics and have become that way over the last 20 years, really, we are known occasionally to elect Republican governors. Christie's not the first. Voters in New Jersey, apparently, and it's not just New Jersey, New York has done the same thing as well. They see the person we want as our executive as sort of less an ideological choice and more a practical choice than the person we want to send down to Washington. Christie has, as I mentioned before, been an expert at working with Democrats in the legislature, but we need to be careful about what we consider bipartisanship here. What Christie did very early on that was smart was establish relationships with the most Democratic, the most powerful Democratic bosses in the state. Before he took office as U.S. Attorney, he did manage to eliminate some of the other most powerful Democratic bosses, and those left standing he managed to work with. So the idea, it's almost as though Christie, you could call him he is a Republican, he's a registered Republican, and he's a potential Republican candidate for president. He speaks at Republican events, but a colleague of mine who covered Christie very well used to say that it's a mistake to call him a Republican because Chris Christie belongs to the Chris Christie party. And I think that's what we've seen over the years, and one of the reasons he's been so successful. As soon as he was elected to office in November 2009, the next day he went to the charter school run by Steve Adubato, the famous Newark political boss. Joe DiVincenzo was there as well. Over the last 4 years, they've developed quite a great working relationship. And I think the relationship that has benefited him most is with George Norcross, who at this point I don't think anyone could argue is the most powerful Democrat in the state. Norcross and Christie share something in common. Neither is an ideological warrior. They know how to work the levers of power. party labels are not extremely important to these people. As such, in office, the Republican Party under Christie in the state has thrived in terms of fundraising, but in terms of party building, when Chris Christie departs the political scene, whether it's to run for president or whether it's just leaving office, Republicans in New Jersey are probably going to be back in the wilderness. The thing is, I think you just need to look at the last legislative election when, despite a 20-point victory at the top of the ticket by Governor Christie, Republicans did not net a single seat in either house of the legislature. That is not something you would expect. Now, Christie came out afterwards and said it's just impossible to deal with this legislative district map that we have. Democrats won the redistricting process, and they drew a favorable map, absolutely. But if you look at the numbers there, you'll see that in districts Christie won by huge amounts, voters actually split their tickets and went with the Democratic legislative candidates. Redistricting can't explain that. So part of it was Christie's lack of campaigning for Republican candidates in South Jersey. There's a lot of conspiracy theories about that. People can draw their own conclusions. There's no real evidence to suggest there was any sort of deal in place. But part of that is the fact that Chris Christie has not worked to build a Republican bench in New Jersey or a Republican brand. And I think if you hear gripes of Republicans off the record, and again, they will never say it publicly, it's that Chris Christie has advanced himself tremendously, but the Republican Party has really not gained from it. And I think even more so in a more extreme case, Cory Booker is up for re-election in November, but you might not know that because while you have 5 Republicans lining up to challenge him, you don't have a single elected official in the mix, one after another, who might have a fighting shot at least, or maybe an ability to raise some money and a donor base, has taken a pass. And I think that speaks to the state of the Republican Party under Christie, that it really hasn't been built up at all. So Christie's resurgence is very much a phenomenon of Chris Christie. And I don't think we're seeing any sort of sea change in the state's politics. When Christie departs the scene, the overwhelming favorite to be the next governor is going to be a Democrat. Now, let's just turn to what's going on right now with Bridgegate. First, I want to make a disclosure that I worked for a website called PoliticsNJ, which then became politicernj.com. I worked there for 3 years before I began at the Star Ledger. My boss was David Wildstein. David was at the time the anonymous political blogger Wally Edge. When I got the job interview was conducted through AOL Instant Messenger. I did not know who he was, and for the first year and 3 months I worked for the website, I didn't know who my boss was. It was an extremely strange situation. It wasn't one I was extremely comfortable with, but you don't have to be in journalism to know how bad the job landscape is, and you can't exactly, you don't have a wide array of choices when you're starting off in journalism to find a job. I wanted to cover New Jersey politics, and that was my opportunity to do it. So I didn't hesitate to take the job despite the strange arrangement. Over the years, about a year and 3 months into it, I was on a bus with a number of other reporters for networked websites, which at the time Politicker had expanded, and they were trying to expand into a national brand. And David Wildstein, who I only had a vague awareness of, was with the company somewhere, was on the bus. And he said something to me on the bus that Wally Edge had told me over Instant Messenger. I can't even tell you exactly what it was, but it was something only that person would have known. And that's how I discovered that Wally Edge was David Wildstein. He refused to acknowledge it until I developed a serious illness and was in the hospital, and finally he came out, okay, we don't, don't need to have this charade anymore. So full disclosure, David Wildstein was more than my boss. We became more or less friends, not close friends, but he was at my wedding. He was at my hospital bedside when he was sick. So I have a personal relationship with him that has certainly made me have to think carefully about how I cover Bridgegate, what I write in the newspaper, and I tend not to deal with David Wildstein, with stories that directly relate to David Wildstein. I will talk about what I know about the situation. I'll even go beyond what I write about, but I just want you to be aware that I do have a personal relationship with this person. So that said, there's a lot of interesting stuff to come out of Bridgegate. Now, why Bridgegate is damaging Christie more than any scandal has damaged a New Jersey governor since at least McGreevey. I think more than everything, it's just that everyone can identify with this, especially in New Jersey. We all sit in traffic. We all hate traffic. But it's considered just one of those things that you can't avoid. The idea that someone would purposefully tie traffic up is so infuriating that I think almost everyone reading that just feels the anger coursing through their blood. New Jersey voters have seen a fair bit of corruption over the years and tend to have a high tolerance for it. But often this is financial transactions or only vague hints of something. It's nothing as visceral as actually being stuck in traffic for hours and hours, school buses, kids not getting to school, all because allegedly a mayor wouldn't endorse the governor. It's just something that everyone can understand and everyone can identify with. And there's also, frankly, despite Christie's now famous marathon press conference the day after these emails broke, there's countless unanswered questions, and frankly, the governor hasn't done much to answer them. His public appearances have been in town hall meetings, which by their very nature attract people more sympathetic to the governor. His only interview with New Jersey media, who really know the ins and outs of this scandal, has been on New Jersey 101.5 FM, which has been a very favorable outlet to him over the years. Granted, Eric Scott, the anchor in the last appearance, did try to pin him down on some questions, but he hasn't actually had a press conference in 2 months, which I'm pretty certain is the longest this governor has ever gone without a press conference, and I don't see any coming on the horizon. Now, the governor has hired an attorney, a very expensive one, to get down to the bottom of this matter and what happened in Fort Lee. But that also begs a lot of questions, because if you look at the email correspondence of what happened that day, it appears that top Christie administration officials were included on the email chains. They were told there was a traffic jam in Fort Lee. They were told that New York side hadn't authorized it. And later, when the story started to break in outlets like the Wall Street Journal, we saw a reference from my old boss, David Wildstein, I believe, in an email to another official there. He said, Maria Camello, who's Christie's communications director, said, the story's not so bad, no one is paying attention. So my biggest question for Christie is, if suddenly you want to get to the bottom of this, why was your communications director saying it's not a big deal, nobody's paying attention in October? There was no sign that the governor had any inclination to discover what happened and why this traffic was tied up and why the New York side was raising a stink about it, until the story became so damaging that he had no choice. And what's difficult for us in the press is that we really have not been able to get answers. Oprah requests have been denied. We're kind of stuck in this limbo right now while there's a federal investigation and a state legislative investigation going on at the same time. So for me, that's the biggest unanswered, well, there's many, many unanswered questions about this scandal, but I think if we just think about it, the governor hired a lawyer to get to the bottom of this. Why did he not act when he knew this was happening? And that's really not something, his excuse that he was told it was a traffic study. Knowing this governor, how skilled he is and how smart he is, it does strain credulity a little bit. So we have a lot of questions. No evidence has surfaced linking the governor directly to this traffic scandal, but it's very hard to believe that we have the full story now, and it's clear that the Christie administration has not exactly put everything out there for us to see. As far as David Wildstein goes, this was, I'll tell you just my personal relationship with David Wildstein was that he, I think it's been mischaracterized a bit in the press to say he was a childhood friend of Governor Christie's. They did know each other. They went to Livingston High School together 1 year apart. Christie was, from what I knew from David, was correct that they were not friends. They were acquaintances. So to try to link them closer together than they were, I think, is a mistake. And I think that's, if there's one thing that I could criticize the press coverage, knowing what I do know, is that to try to characterize it as a closer friendship than it was would be incorrect. As a member of the press, the governor's treatment of reporters is interesting. I don't consider it very, I don't think he's treated reporters poorly. But what I find most interesting is recently he's been attacking the media as the coverage has gotten more critical. The media, and especially the national media, has been largely responsible for how the governor became a front-runner contender to be the Republican nominee in 2016. Coverage outside of New Jersey was almost entirely uncritical. What the governor said was pretty much taken at his word. Things were not fact-checked. The governor's, I think I read in the Washington Post that Chris Christie had reformed New Jersey's tax system. And it was almost like a thrown away line as an aside. There was a certain credulity in this coverage, and that has changed. And now the national coverage of him has shifted entirely. There's been a lot of finger pointing at the press and saying, you're picking on Chris Christie. Every day I get emails and I see phone comments on the website that say, how come you're not reporting on Bob Menendez's scandals more? How come you're not reporting on Rob Andrews' scandals more? They're Democrats, that's why. It's like, I think if you take a look at our coverage over the last 4 years, you'll see that whether he's riding high or whether he's mired in scandal, Governor Christie gets more coverage. It's the nature of being governor, being an outsized personality who draws a lot of readers in, and being a front-runner contender for president. So do we cover Christie more than, do we cover Christie's ethical troubles more than Bob Menendez's? Yes. When Christie does anything, good or bad, he gets more space in our paper, more stories on our website. That's the nature of the beast. It's a simple explanation. It has nothing to do with partisan bias. I don't think most of you are considering a career in journalism, so I won't go too much into that, but I will say I just want to talk a little bit about reporting in general and how I'm trying to deal with it as we have this incredible shifting landscape right now. One of the biggest problems, I think, with the new models of online reporting is people are sacrificing accuracy for speed. If you recall, CNN bungled the story of the affordable housing. I'm sorry, not affordable housing. I mean Obamacare. They said the Supreme Court had overruled the key part of Obamacare when in fact it was the opposite. One of the things that I've tried to keep in mind as someone who tries to write things fast is that even if you're first, almost no one is going to remember it. But if you mess up, if you get something wrong, almost everyone is going to remember it. And everyone remembers how CNN screwed up that decision. Who got the story right first? I don't think anyone can tell you that. Another thing I've learned in 7 years is that if you go to a council meeting or a legislative hearing, there's going to be that person who shows up to every meeting, and they always testify. And when they get up there, the council members or the assembly members, they roll their eyes, say, "Oh, it's you again." A lot of people call them gadflies, and sure, they can be annoying, but one of the things I try to do is not ignore them, because these people, they can be eccentric, but they also spend hours and hours and hours in digging. And some of the best stories I've had have come from gadflies who didn't even realize the significance of the story they had. So I try not to ignore them, and I try to develop relationships even with these people. It's a mistake to dismiss them, even if they're strange or eccentric. I am trying to use anonymous sources as sparingly as I can. Unfortunately, I think it's unavoidable that from time to time we need to use anonymous sources, but I think the culture in national reporting in Washington is almost to use them as a default. I get press releases sometimes from Washington that begins the press release on background. It says on background, as if you can use this information but don't attribute it to me by name. Well, I didn't even ask for this press release, and you're sending me something and telling me that I can't use your name? Now, that's not a fair arrangement, and it eliminates some accountability and transparency. I think it's our job to present information with the best sources we can get. Sometimes it needs to be anonymous. I have written dozens and dozens of stories with anonymous sources, but I take pains not to have to. I have seen other reporters cite information like New Jersey's voter registration statistics, citing anonymous sources for them, when you can simply go to the State Division of Elections and look it up. I think it's lazy, and we need to do better. I also recognize as a reporter, people use us. I think it's naive to think that when someone slips me a piece of opposition research or maybe something, whenever someone slips me information, I'm assuming they have an agenda, and I think it's healthy to assume that. That doesn't mean we shouldn't disseminate the information, but if we're aware and try at least to understand what they're using us for, we can present more balanced information. I don't think there's anything wrong with using this information. I just think we should try our best to be aware of why someone is giving it to us. That's really all I have prepared right now. I hope that answers a bit. I'm happy to go into more detail and answer any questions you have, especially about Bridgegate or anything else.
What do you think about the power that Christie seems to have over the Port Authority? Is this a normal kind of power that a governor would have? I was reading the Times, I believe, article this morning.
Yeah, the governor always has a good deal of power over the Port Authority. The New York and New Jersey governors can exercise vetoes over the minutes. They're really the only thing that can hold the Port Authority accountable. I'll give you an example. I live in Jersey City, and they're shutting down for maintenance a line of the PATH system, the World Trade Center line of the PATH system. There may be a very good reason for that. But this organization gave 8 days notice, and they're shutting it down on weekends for a year. I don't think an organization that is more responsive to the public would give 8 days notice when you're shutting off a major artery to the city every weekend for a year. The only people who can really put pressure on the organization are the governors of New York and New Jersey. And it's been that way since the organization was founded in the 20s. But Christie has, I believe the amount of patronage appointees under Christie has gone up since previous governors. And I believe his use of the authority to fund projects, for instance, eliminating the rail tunnel, which cost the state hundreds of millions of dollars, but that allowed him to shift money into road maintenance so he wouldn't have to raise the gas tax. He's such a political skilled operator. He has been very good at doing this without catching him that often in the press. So yes, I believe the governor has used it more as a political tool than other governors. It's always been a patronage pit, it's always been a political tool, but it's been more extreme under Governor Christie. Yeah, that's true.
Governors Kelly and Sibian avoid the subpoenas that they've been presented with. They claim it's a fishing expedition, but I understand that the subpoenas are fairly specific.
Yeah, well, what you mentioned right now, and you'll read it in our paper tomorrow, and you can read it on our website right now, is in court today, in Trenton, in Superior Court. We won't have a decision for at least another week. That's the argument right now. Another argument that the attorney for those two is using is that they're under federal investigation, so they might compromise themselves if they were to turn this over to a legislative body that it will become public record. But it's hard to imagine, for a judge, maybe in a legal sense, that argument holds water. But the idea that this is a fishing expedition, well, we wouldn't know what we know now if the legislature had not gotten subpoena power. We would not have the email that said, time for some traffic problems in Fort Lee. Turn this into a story that really only political insiders were paying attention to, into a mega national story that is threatening to destroy Chris Christie's political career. So it is kind of, could have argued that at first that it was a fishing expedition. Well, they caught a fish. So clearly there's a lot of reason to think that there's more information in these emails that they're not turning over. Yes, yeah.
For the last 7 or 8 weeks, there have been 2 words that have appeared on the front page of the Star Ledger. One is Christie and the other is scandal. Is there a test going on within the Star Ledger to see how many times and how often those words can be put and how close together?
Well, like I said, I think the governor dominates our pages when he's doing things that are winning him accolades, like changing the pension system or winning re-election by a huge margin. By the same token, I think when Christie is facing trouble, he gets a lot of space in the Star Ledger. I also think that, our editorial board, I don't think makes any claims to be anything but liberal-leaning. I don't think they would dispute that. But I think that's often conflated with our regular hard news coverage, of which I'm a part, and I think that would be a mistake to do that. I have people accusing us of giving Christie a pass for the last 4 years, and admittedly, I think a lot of the press, including us, could have done a better job in some respects. And then we also have people constantly blaming us for using the words Christie and scandal, but I certainly think it's a legitimate scandal. I think it's the biggest scandal to hit New Jersey since Jim McGreevey. And I think if you look back at our Jim McGreevey coverage, we won a Pulitzer Prize for that. I wasn't, unfortunately, at the time. But you'll find that we were pretty aggressive with Jim McGreevey, too. Okay.
At the start of your talk, you talked about the unusual powers of the New Jersey government, and that includes the ability to appoint the Attorney General. Do you think that should be changed? Do you think there's any chance that would be changed? It requires a constitutional change.
I'd rather not give my opinion personally on whether it should be changed, but I think the chances of it, I wrote about it today, you said, I think the chances of it happening admittedly are slim. I think that's because you have a Senate president right now who would have to approve this bill, who wants to be governor. And for him to, I don't think he's going to rush to limit his powers right after Chris Christie. So I think the chances of it happening are fairly slim. Do I think we should definitely look, I think there's a lot of instances, it's hard to argue that the Attorney General's office hasn't in a lot of cases been politicized, and that there's definitely fair reason to look into why it should be more independent. And I think even, yes, the Attorney General's office, you could make plenty of arguments for why it was fine for them to fight attempts to legalize gay marriage in New Jersey, even if other states with elected Attorney Generals sometimes drop their opposition. It's harder to argue for why they would not defend a state gun law that a judge even chastised them for doing. But what's really, really hard to understand is what happened in the case of Ben Barlin, the Hunterdon County prosecutor. Well, what happened was there was an investigation of, was an indictment of the Hunterdon County Sheriff, Deborah Trout, who's a Republican, who had a relationship with Kim Godano and was a Chris Christie loyalist. And one of her undersheriffs, who was also indicted, at one point told someone, it's okay, we're going to get this indictment quashed. The governor's not going to allow it to happen. And it did get quashed. You can read about that in the Hunterdon County Democrat, and there's also a New York Times column about it. I think that's more than anything a reason why people should look into and examine whether the Attorney General's office is too politicized. Did a Christie loyalist, did someone who's close to Kim Godano get her indictment quashed by Paula Dow, the Attorney General at the time, political reasons? Of course, they deny it, but there's a lot of interesting questions about that. So I think that probably is the strongest case out of all of them. Yeah, I hope that helps answer the question a little bit.
To ask you about Andrew Cuomo, and I think it's Patrick Foy.
Mm-hmm.
Why they haven't been more vocal? I know the U.S. Attorney from New York was involved and has decided to work, with the U.S. Attorney from New Jersey. But after all, they share the authority. Why aren't they out there more vocal?
That's a really interesting question.
Pardon me?
That's a very interesting question. Now, Patrick Foy, I think, Patrick Foy is probably the reason we know about this, if you really trace it all the way back. I think he's the kind of guy that really gets out there in grandstands. Now, I don't know him personally, and I don't support New York politics, but he saw this happening and wrote some very angry letters that were leaked to the press. And the first outlet to get those was the Wall Street Journal. And I think it's widely considered, I think most of us think that New York side of the Port Authority leaked this to the press first. there's always tensions in the Port Authority between New York and New Jersey. But as far as Andrew Cuomo, he and Chris Christie have had sort of a symbiotic relationship. If you look at the recent stories about the toll hikes, Hudson River, he and Christie, according to these officials in the Port Authority, actually coordinated this so that they would start with a higher number and go to a lower number. I mean, that's a common tactic, but the way it was orchestrated here is a little different. There was also a story that the governor called Andrew Cuomo and asked him to cool his guys down on this Bridgegate stuff. This was before the story really broke open. This, I believe it was in the Wall Street Journal. And Cuomo vaguely denied that, but not really. I think you have Cuomo aides, maybe insiders, who really want to go after Christie, but they don't want Cuomo to be the face of opposition against Christie. Governors of New York and New Jersey have to work together a lot. And he probably figures, and this is just my speculation, but he probably figures it doesn't serve him well to be out there publicly chastising the governor. There's plenty of people who are willing to do that for him. It's also an interesting dynamic because he's less often mentioned, but Andrew Cuomo is considered a potential presidential contender in 2016 as well. Maybe he'll get a little more emboldened. He's still popular in New York. And what's interesting is that, Christie has for a long time been more popular in New Jersey than Andrew Cuomo is in New York, but in recent polls, we're actually seeing the opposite happen. I can't tell you exactly why he's reticent, but I think there's, it might just be because he doesn't need to be. There's plenty of people to do that for him, and he can give the appearance of working together with Christie.
Is assuming that Christie survives this, and I think he's probably smart enough and he's totally clearly guilty to survive it, why do you think there will be an effect on 2016? Americans give politicians, certainly New Jerseyans forgive politicians.
If there's one thing Christie has going for him here is that we're very far from 2016, and people have overcome scandals to get there. However, I think there was a poll today. The Iowa, the Des Moines Register. Did anyone see the front page of the Des Moines Register today? It's Chris Christie standing, his legs spanning over the George Washington Bridge. This is the Des Moines Register newspaper, and Chris Christie, it's a huge drawing of a caricature of Chris Christie on the front page talking about how Iowa voters disapprove of his handling of the George Washington Bridge scandal. I mean, this is huge. The one thing going for him, we're pretty far from 2016. This is the first, I think it's not just this scandal alone. What this has done is change the national press narrative about Chris Christie. On election night, he had Jake Tapper of CNN following him around. God, us New Jersey reporters would kill for that kind of access. He had him on the campaign bus with him. This was uncritical coverage. This was national press. You can read the old clips. I mean, they were enamored by Christie. He was a different kind of Republican. He tells it to him straight. The things we wrote about here in New Jersey, they didn't really pay much attention to. But that's changed. This has sort of exposed that he's not the guy they thought he was. So I think that, more than anything, the change in narrative than this scandal alone is what's really going to affect 2016. I still think he's absolutely a top contender for 2016. But he's not the clear frontrunner anymore, and I don't think he's going to be the clear frontrunner for a while if he does regain it.
Back in the Nixon days, the phenomenon was that people lower down the chain made deals with prosecutors giving information about people further up the chain. Now, there are people who do this, like Kelly, I forgot her first name, but
Bridget Kelly.
The first one fired. Is there much percolating down there? First of all, is anybody guilty of anything they could be indicted for or do jail time for? And if so, or even if not so, can they give information that will put upward pressure on toward getting more out on the Christie matter?
Yeah. As for whether anyone could be guilty of any crimes, absolutely. There's no doubt there's a whole array of crimes. Less clear on a federal level what those crimes are than at the state level, but there's all kinds of potential obstruction of justice. Official misconduct, I think, would be the most obvious state crime that could have happened here. But one thing about Chris Christie is the immense loyalty his staff, both as U.S. Attorney and as governor, have felt towards him. And that's why I think you see a difference with David Wildstein, again, full disclosure, my old boss. He's the one that appears to be ready to turn based on the news coverage. You don't see that with Bridget Kelly. A lot of these people, not Bridget Kelly and Bill Stepien, but a lot of these people in Christie's office are former federal prosecutors. They know the law really well. They worked under Christie. They're extremely loyal to him. And I'd say if anyone flips, it's less likely to be the people in the federal who worked under him in the U.S. Attorney's Office, and more the people who've only known him for the last 5 or 6 years, who really were his political operation. That includes Bridget Kelly and Bill Stepien. But I'd be more worried about David Wildstein and Bill Baroni, because they're the ones who are the most directly implicated at the Port Authority, and they're the ones with less ties, less direct ties to the governor. Back there, I'm sorry.
Do you think we'll be hearing more about Sandy funds and the administration of them?
I think so. I hope so. It's very complicated. The data can be hard to sort through. I've done, a story on it. I've seen more. There's another $1.8 billion or $1.6 billion coming into New Jersey to spend right now. In fact, that reminds me, I got to take a trip over to Belleville and see if they've started construction yet on that project I wrote about. They actually failed. One of the reasons they gave it this funding was because they called it a shovel-ready project that was ready to get off the ground. Well, they had the groundbreaking in May, and last I checked, late last month, still hadn't started construction. So because they hadn't started construction, the developer actually had to go get more money from the development block grant program and get a reauthorization from the state. I think it's true that the governor is blaming the federal government for a lot of tie-ups, but he still hasn't given us a good explanation of why he fired the company that the state hired to distribute a lot of the funds to these homeowners. I think, and while the bridge scandal has taken a toll on the governor, I also think that the mess in distributing Sandy funds is probably also playing a part, maybe less in the drop-in polls. I think we're going to continue to see that. I've heard that there's major news networks on some mysterious Sandy story that I'm trying to figure out so I can beat them to the punch, but I don't know what they're working on. I'd love to know. So yes, I think you're going to hear a lot more, to make a long story short. And again, I think that has to do with this new lens where the national press is seeing Christie. When you get the national media and the resources they have trained on you, that's a lot more spotlight that we in the New Jersey Press Corps have been able to provide. So I expect more to come out of that.
I'm wondering if what he has done in those town halls where he attacked people who criticized him, and the persona was a tough guy, take no prisoners kind of attitude, would that kind of create an atmosphere around him? People would think that undertaking this bridge would be something that would be kind of interesting. And
a lot of people have had that very theory. If you were to ask me my just opinion, if we're talking, this isn't something I would write for publication, but did the governor directly order this? I think it's less likely he directly ordered this, but people have a legitimate qualm when they say, well, did you create a culture where this could happen? Did you create a culture where you say, do something to this guy? I don't want to know what you do, just do something. I don't know. I'm not saying that's what happened, but there's a lot of theories that it was more along those lines. And it's funny that you mentioned the town hall meetings and the tough guy persona. I know this is a little off topic. I just want to go into that a little bit. The governor has had 3 town hall meetings since this happened. He's had, I guess, 111 or something since he's taking office. If you look at these, nobody asked him about Bridgegate in these town hall meetings, but something happened. I thought that was very telling, the one that was in the Berkeley-Toms River area. I think that was the last one. Someone asked a question about Obamacare, and he said, well, you can elect you president, and the crowd rose to their feet. The last poll I saw in New Jersey, Obama's not extremely popular here, but he's more popular than not. And have a town hall in the middle of Ocean County, your biggest county in the election, one of the most red state counties in New Jersey, is not reflective of the political makeup of New Jersey. And his town hall, so start with that. and then look at his town halls and the way they operate. One thing is the local legislators often are the people who help invite people. They're held in the middle of the day, which means his biggest critics, teachers, almost never able to make it. By their very nature, the way these things are set up become de facto rallies for Christie on the government dime. There's nothing illegal about it, but I certainly think a lot of people would be upset when they realize just how political these things can get. We'll see. His next town halls are, he's got 2 more town halls coming up that we know of. They're both in less Republican towns. But a lot of people would like to see him hold a town hall in Fort Lee and see how that goes. Yeah, we'll see.
Matt, you said earlier that you think, I'm back here.
Oh, hey.
You said earlier you think he still maintains his front-runner status for 2016. So how do you see him navigating the whole conservative base of the Republican Party while still governing? I mean, is it your contention that you think he will, in his second term, just decide to go very, very right with his eyes on the prize, so to speak, or do you see something else for him?
Yeah, I think we're already seeing it. Look, just to clarify my comments a little, I think he will be a top contender, but I think the lone front-runner status is gone. I think we're already seeing him go right. We saw it with the CPAC speech. He wasn't even invited last year, and he goes to CPAC this year, and he was throwing out all kinds of red meat. Blaming the media is a good way to start. As even you blame the media, and conservatives love it, but it's not like anyone else really loves us either. We're kind of like lawyers, right? No offense to lawyers in this room. We're kind of we're not one of the most well-liked professions, whether that's fair or not. Going after the media, he went after Obama. This is a year after he went, along the boardwalk with Obama. Less than a year. I mean, during the campaign for governor, Obama showed up to the boardwalk with him. I mean, that was devastating to Barbara Buono. Not only would Obama not campaign for him, but he's going and doing a photo op with Christie on the shore in the middle of the campaign. He went hard after Obama. He said, "What are we paying you for?" I thought that was sort of ironic that it was the middle of a weekday and he was in Washington at a political conference and he was saying, "What are we paying you for?" But he went after Harry Reid. I haven't heard him. I heard him go after John Boehner a year ago, but I didn't hear him go after Harry Reid until recently. So this is a guy who, in the run-up to his re-election in New Jersey, was going after Republicans, but clearly the tone has shifted. This is a guy who ran on bipartisanship in re-election, and now he's at this conservative conference throwing out red meat left and right to conservatives. So yes, he's already made the shift right. I think. And look at his talk about pensions. A year ago, he was campaigning on having fixed the pension system and how it's going to get better now. Now he's saying, it's a huge crisis and we need to do more, cut back pensions for public workers. And if the legislature doesn't act, which by the way they won't, says I'll do what I can on my own. I think it's limited what he can, but we'll see him at least attempt some things. I think we might see some court battles coming out of that. So yeah, I think the shift right has already begun and I think it will continue. And I think maybe the last bipartisan hurrah was the bill to offer in-state tuition for illegal immigrants. I think that might be the last big bipartisan hurrah for Chris Christie.
Matt, what do you think about?
Well, he got the bill watered down a bit so that would not be eligible for tuition assistance grants and some other state-based financial aid programs. But he still accepted the bill. He signed the bill. That's true.
Matt, what do you think about the Star Ledger's handling of their endorsement of the governor? And do you think that the broader conversation hurt the credibility of the anyway?
I thought the endorsement, actually, the most interesting endorsement of any newspaper I've ever read. It was the most backhanded endorsement you could possibly make. It was a whole column that just slammed them and said, well, Barbara Buono's not a valid candidate. So personally, I felt if you're going to go that far, regardless of my personal opinions, it would make more sense to me to sit it out. It kind of opened us up for some ridicule that our editorial board then backed off the endorsement. So my personal opinion is, if you really feel that strongly, maybe sit it out and don't endorse anyone. but, nowadays we're in the business of web hits, and those editorials got hundreds of thousands of web hits, so good for them, our editorial board, God love them, causes us, it's just the nature of the beast. It causes headaches because a lot of people don't differentiate between us and them. So it goes.
Thank you. Will anything be able to happen legislatively in the next 2 years?
Little things. I think what we will see a compromise or some sort of thing on, there is when Governor Christie and the legislature sort of reformed pensions a little bit and health benefits and things like that, they put a cap on arbitration awards. So basically, if your police department in town is having a contract dispute with the town council and the mayor, and they can't come to a resolution, this third-party arbitrator steps in. They make the decision. For years, the arbitrators were awarding contracts that were generally favorable to the unions. So they put in a law that said the arbitrators can't give the unions more than a 2% raise. And universally, towns seem to be saying, this is working. This is the one thing that has helped us keep property taxes in check over the last 4 years. That law expires April 1st. And I don't think there's no doubt in my mind that it's going to have to be renewed, and that's going to take a bipartisan effort. If Democrats don't renew this, the governor is going to have a field day slamming them in town hall meetings as increasing your property taxes. So I think it's going to get done. I wouldn't be surprised if it gets hashed out in the next couple weeks. Even if they go a little over the April 1st deadline, I don't think Democrats have a choice. We'll see that get done. I think at the same time you're going to see Chris Christie moving right, you're going to see Steve Sweeney, the Senate president, moving left, because he wants to run for governor, and he wants to run a Democratic primary for governor, and he's not going to be alone. So I think you've identified something there, which is the legislature is going to head left, and the governor is going to head right. I think the days of bipartisan cooperation, and by bipartisan I mean George Norcross allies in the legislature, Joe DiVincenzo allies in the legislature, and Chris Christie. I think those days are over as Steve Sweeney plots out a run for governor and Governor Christie plots out a run for president. It's hard to see how they can cooperate on very big policy issues. Yeah, small things will get done, things, but the big stuff is the first term. Well, David and Bill Baroni were very, very, very close friends. Bill Baroni was a state senator for a number of years and actually a very popular figure in Trenton. Democrats liked Bill because he was a very moderate Republican. He was, I believe, the only Republican vote for gay marriage in January 2010. Governor named Bill Baroni deputy executive director, which is basically on the nuts and bolts side of the Port Authority. New York gets the executive director, that's Pat Foy, and New Jersey gets the second in command, whereas New Jersey gets the chairman and New York gets the vice chairman. Christie named Baroni to that position, and Baroni and Wildstein had been friends since the Bob Franks campaign. Baroni, I think, was counsel to the Bob Franks U.S. Senate campaign. Baroni was counsel to Bob Franks' campaign. Remember, there was a big court case when they switched Lautenberg on the ballot for Torricelli because he had those problems, and he had to, Torricelli was under investigation and unsustainable as a candidate. Those relationships forged on that campaign were very strong. The person on the campaign was Bill Stepien. Mike DeHame was on the campaign. And those four guys became very close friends. David Wildstein, Mike DeHame, who's, I didn't mention him before, he's Christie's chief strategist. So when Bill Baroni was named by the governor to be deputy executive director, he brought David Wildstein with him, with the approval of the governor's office. David Wildstein and Chris Christie, like I said before, they weren't friends. In fact, I can tell you from personal experience when I worked at PolitikerNJ that Christie didn't like him. PolitikerNJ.com was owned by Jared Kushner. Jared Kushner is the son of Charles Kushner, who was a real estate magnate who the governor, as U.S. attorney, put in prison. So I remember once calling Bill Palatucci when I was a reporter for PolitickerNJ.com and trying to ask him just about something related to what Christie was doing. And he said, you can only quote me if you say, PolitickerNJ.com is a tool of the Kushner family. And so there was, the relationship, what I noticed with David Wildstein and Christie was that got closer right after Christie won re-election. And David Wildstein wound up knowing a lot of what was going to happen in the Christie administration. He knew a lot about upcoming appointments, but he actually stopped writing it because he was kind of becoming a Christie insider. And this was just a couple months before he left. So he would know things that were going to happen, and the Star-Ledger would report it. Because he felt he had it, he knew because he knew Bill Stepien so well, but he couldn't write it because, you know, he couldn't betray any trust or anything like that. So he started getting into Christie's inner circle that way. It was through Bill Baroni and Bill Stepien that David Wildstein became a member of the inner circle. He was only a very recent member of the governor's inner circle. The question was how David Wildstein got to the Port Authority. I know it was one of Bill Baroni's best friends. Bill Baroni brought him along with him with the governor's acknowledgement and assessment. That's how that happened. Yeah. I'm sorry.
There's something with Palatucci. He was involved in running very well.
Yeah. For years, yeah, I think I know what you're referring to. For years, Bill Palatucci was a lobbyist for community education centers. It's a halfway house company. There's been a lot of problems with these. There's a lot of lack of security at these houses. There was one person who escaped and then murdered his girlfriend. It's a very politically connected organization, and Bill Palatucci was a long-time part of that company. The New York Times did a major expose on them a couple years ago. That's Bill Palatucci has been attached to some controversy too. In fact, I think the only major political player who really has come out without too much scathing in the recent scandals has been Mike Duhame. His name has only been mentioned once in relation to the latest controversies, and that was the Hoboken controversy, which I know we haven't touched on, where the Rockefeller Group, a connected developer that David Sampson was, according to the Hoboken mayor, Christie administration was trying to shake her down to approve their development. And it turns out that they hired Duhame's firm to conduct a poll. That's the only mention of him in all this. So I find it interesting that he's sort of like, I think he's really the only top Christie insider who hasn't really been tarnished much by these recent scandals.
When we heard that he was investigating what happened and he hired somebody, first of all, who is paying for that? And
you are.
Second, yes, I thought so. And secondly, it was a big burst of news when it first happened, and nothing has been said recently about what is that action, what is taking place.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of legitimate questions to be raised about that. Randy Mastro, a former, I think he was a deputy mayor under Rudy Giuliani in New York City. I think he was a New York Yankees executive for a while. He's charging $650 an hour to conduct this internal investigation. Randy Mastro is not known as a guy who you would hire really to get to the bottom of what happened. He's the kind of guy who you would generally hire to sort of protect you. So, look. There is a bit, when the governor scheduled a general election, let me just purely objectively, in a lot, whether it's town hall meetings, whether it's special elections for U.S. Senate 3 weeks before a regularly scheduled election, whether it's hiring Randy Mastro, there's a lot of cases where you could make the argument that taxpayers are helping prop up Christie's political career. Randy Mastro is not known for exactly, you know, I think he's been called the master of disaster or the maestro of mayhem or something like that. He's like a crisis management guy, but in terms of a straightforward investigation into what happened, I think that also brings up the question of why this didn't happen earlier, when you really could have gotten to the bottom of it before the U.S. attorney was investigating. Back in October, when what we know is there was an email citing Maria Camella saying, I'm not worried about the story, nobody is paying attention. So why he didn't hire Randy Master then, I don't know.
Thank you so much for coming.
Thanks.
Thank you.